I'd like to continue our discussion of laws relating to, the pursuit of justice, the adjudication of disputes, and criminal cases, etc. But I wanted to spice it up a little bit first before we get to the book. The book has a lot to say legally about, a lot of different topics, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it today, hopefully, at least begin, get back to it. But I wanted to, I just couldn't help myself, being that the other week we, this exact mitzvah, exact commandment, judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities. And it's always read this time of year. And I thought that we should maybe discuss some of the points and things that we can glean from the reading. So it says there, this is in chapter 16, and verses 18 through 18 through 20. Just a few verses. Judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities, which Hashem your God gives you, for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. So one needs to be appointed. Let's take it step by step. We have to appoint judges and officers. So what is officers? Something we've discussed in the past. The idea of those that will enforce, correct? That's judges and officers. Okay, this should be appointed in all cities, which God gives you, for your tribes. So, in other words, this seems to imply that the cities we're talking about are the ones in the land of Israel that are given to the tribes. And they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. So there's a lot of different points. First of all, judges and officers, because I'll just start word by word here. Obviously, the first thing is judges, and then officers to enforce. And sages say that one of the opinions in the Talmud says that you're only obligated to appoint judges when you have enforcers available. If you don't have enforcers, you don't have to appoint judges. Why do you think that should be? Any ideas?
Certainly. I mean, if you find someone guilty and there's no officers to execute whatever punishment there is, unless you endow the judge to do that, it doesn't matter if you find them guilty or not, unless there's someone who is going to take this person to ensure that the sentence is executed.
Right. The implication is that it really undermines justice, because when you have a decision and it's not carried out and it lays flat, so to speak, it's almost issued in vain when no one's carrying it out. So what happens is that the court's legitimacy and power loses its value in the eyes of the people. And so the purposes of justice, which is is to mold and educate, but in a form of deterrence, in a form of there's a kind of enforcement that's going on. You see in the Torah again and again, it says person should be punished, particularly in regards to capital punishments, and the people will hear and they will be afraid. And you see that very well. That's the idea in English of a deterrent. When the people understand that when such and such is committed, when a person does an act of abomination, whether it be idolatry, murder, adultery, and so on, blasphemy, that they'll be put to death, then people are afraid and they understand the seriousness of these things. It creates a taboo. It really molds the nation. It invests them with certain values and attitudes, and they take things seriously. It makes them take it seriously. Very simple English. if nobody carries it out, it's not taken seriously. So it actually ends up causing more harm than good. It's like when a teacher says no talking and no one listens, and then they don't do anything. So what ends up happening is the students they lose respect for the teacher, or certainly they lose their fear for the teacher. And yes, a degree of respect. They may like the teacher, maybe he or she a nice person, but they have absolutely no fear or awe of that teacher. And so that's problematic. And so that's what we don't want. It's better they shouldn't issue any judgments if there's no one to enforce anything. So that's one very powerful, sensible opinion, is why we have them together. Judges and enforcers and officers, like police officers. It goes together. The other thing we see is that it says, you shall appoint in all your cities. So there is an affirmative command to make sure that they exist, which is, again, similar to the Noahide command, which is to implement judges, make sure there are courts. And so this would imply that in the Noahide system also, when we say that there's a mitzvah, there's a command to establish courts, it doesn't just mean a court, it means with officers as well. Because as we just said, a court, a judge without an officer is basically, it has no punch, for lack of a better term at the moment. It has no kick, right? I mean, what's literally, it doesn't pack a punch. Okay, all these different metaphors fit, right? So that's important. That has to be done that way. It's a very interesting thing that, in the way the Noahide law is structured, all the other 6 laws are negatives. They are, you refrain from such and such, refrain from such and such, refrain. And then finally we come to this one mitzvah, this one command, which is an affirmative act, which is quite active, which is that people have to get together and create a system of enforcement, of control, that people should make sure to refrain from the things that were spoken about previously. And that's quite interesting. Of course, the meaning of it, is that, the interesting part is all the other laws were just don't do. Now suddenly, no, you have to go do it in a very, very active way, where everyone has to get together as a community and do this. And this actually is an investiture of money and resources and time. This mitzvah, in a certain sense, is more difficult than if there would be just a command to, let's say, there was a direct command on a Noahide to wear the tzitzit, to wear a 4-cornered garment, right? That would be, because the point is that's private. You can sit at home and make it for yourself. But this mitzvah is not so simple. I could be, I myself being righteous, it's not going to work. I have to get a lot of other people together, and we all have to get together and get funds together, or and get and organize our society. That's what this mitzvah is basically saying. And so it's like there's a lot of don'ts, and then all of a sudden you have a pretty heavy do at the end there, But basically, it also is telling us that the other commandments are not just commandments on the individual; they actually are, through the 7th, they're a commandment on the whole community, right? Because the point is the community is obligated to make sure that the first 6 are adhered to. So it's a very practical in that sense, very practical, very sensible. It's not just saying you sit at home, if you can do it, good. It's a religion for the individual. You can live holy in your own, monastery by yourself. No, this is something we want to see the community doing. We want to see the community to have certain values, certain taboos, certain points of view, and you have to make sure that that happens. That's really what this mitzvah is saying. So it has to include both judges and officers. I think it should mirror this biblical command pretty much on target. And as far as in all the cities, I think also that should apply to Noahides very clearly, because again, in order to satisfy the objective of making people sure that people are deterred, and making sure that you need to have this, in every important place at the very least, where people will become cultured, educated, affected by these laws. The centers of the nation's identity and culture, of course, must have a court. They must have police officers. It's absolutely imperative that they do. But there's another interesting thing about this is that it also seems to answer a question that we had, or at least work tandem to show us that cultural norms alone are not enough. You could say, let's just have the first six and just tell everybody and teach everyone, and that's it. Isn't that enough? And no, it isn't enough. And that's also quite interesting. In other words, that this mitzvah of instituting, establishing courts is saying that this is a system of laws. It's not just a religion for individuals. It's not even just a religion where we come together, in a church-like sanctuary, where we come together in a temple and we all worship together and we preach these rules and these values. That's not enough either. So that's highly interesting. Even that isn't enough. Even for all the nations, it's not enough. They have to actually have a governmental system that enforces and reinforces these values and these laws. Basically, that act as God's emissaries in order to make sure that people are keeping this. So that's very, very interesting. So in that sense, it's like kind of like, to paraphrase Rabbi Manis Freedom, and I hear him quite a bit saying things like Judaism is not a religion, which other people also say. But, I don't know what a religion exactly is, but in terms of its being a definition of a form of worship of God solely, then that's true. But also what we see here is that, in other words, what I'm saying is Judaism is not, particularly these 7 laws, it seems like from this last one, there's more of an interest that maybe we should look at this law in a vacuum a little bit, but it seems like this law may teach us on all the others that this is about being God's emissaries to see that the world conducts itself in the way that God wants it to, more than about us connecting with him, but about us acting as his servants to make sure that the world conducts itself as its king sees fit. Which, of course, simultaneously, that's to the greatest advantage of mankind and the rest of creation. But it almost implies a little bit like that's an ancillary, secondary matter. I don't know if that's true, but it's just something that comes to my mind from this mitzvah. But in any case, the point is, you should establish in all your gates, and we know that the word gates means in your cities. In the Hebrew, it says in all your gates that God gives to your tribes. And there's a discussion about why does it have to say to all your tribes? It's if in all your cities, then of course it's in all your tribes. And I was wondering that if there may be a meaning here, which I don't see in the sources, but there may be an idea that it should be done with, local people, meaning to say it should be done with people that have a connection with the community. Each tribe should have its own court. Why? Why can't they just go to some other? No, you can't go to another tribe's court. They should go to their own court. And maybe that similarly should be an example to Noahides. In other words, each nation, they have to establish this in their own people that do understand them and that they can respect and relate to. They should be their judges and officers, obviously with following what comes out of the mouth of the Sanhedrin once the Mashiach comes, and so to instruct them, but that's another issue. But the point is, on a day-to-day basis, it should be people that they feel comfortable with, accustomed to, and there's no, and they understand and relate to their way of life. So that's just a thought that I had that may or may not be correct, which is something that came to my mind that we may be able to learn from the idea of to your tribes. Ross?
Well, if the idea here it fits with Jethro's advice in Exodus 18. Over 50s, over hundreds, over thousands. So it's not just, you're not going to have just a Sanhedrin and that's it. It's got to be an entire system that goes throughout the the tribes, cities, whatever you want.
Right.
Everything is it is what is the structure after Moses. Everybody was bringing everything to him, and the idea was no, everybody everywhere should know the law. Only the really difficult matters, if someone is not capable, let's say, of dealing with a particular matter, then you escalate it.
Right. Right. Right.
That was the model that was given, and that's exactly what I think he's trying to describe here.
Well, that brings us to the issue of education, which is another, point of view as far as we spoke about that before. The role of the judges is not only to enforce but also to educate. Now we give another reason why each cities need to have judges, and whether or not that's expressly part of this law is quite obviously implied. We can't enforce something on people that don't know anything about it. It's wrong. It would be very highly irresponsible for the Noahide community to enforce this without making sure people know, especially in the beginning, before people have been accustomed to these values. Then they have to know how serious it is before should be carried out. Ross, you were in the middle. Did I cut you off?
No. It's just it part of the model is, who are the keepers of the law? Who are the keepers of the law?
When you say keepers, what do you mean by keepers? Those who are observing it?
No. Who was given possession to guard the law? Who was it?
Israel.
The Levites in particular.
Levites and priests in particular, right.
Okay. And there are 48 cities, supposedly, throughout the entirety of Israel.
Right.
There are cities in every one of the tribal areas.
Oh, good point.
So you should be able to go to your local Levite and have him discuss the matters of the law and be a part of the judges and settling disputes, because they're everywhere. So that's part of the system. They're the keepers of the law. They should know the law. They're teaching the law. They have to learn the law. They have to know the law. So who better to go to?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, historically, whether that was actually the case, is an interesting discussion. But yeah, that's clearly the intent of the scripture, is that the priests and the Levites should be the ones. In fact, obviously, at the end of the reading of last week, it says that expressly in regards to the decapitated heifer, for lack of a better word, right? At the end of the discussion, am I in the right? Is that right? It was last week, right? Yeah. It has this verse where it says that expressly in chapter 21 of Deuteronomy, verse 5. Right? It says, and the priests, the children of Levi, they should move forward. They should come forward because they were the ones who were chosen by the Lord your God to serve him, to bless with his name. And upon their word should be all disputes and all blemishes. So there it is. They're the ones who are supposed to do this. And obviously the reason is because they were not given land, so they're not busy, occupied with agriculture. They're supposed to have a portion, of mandated portion of a tithe is supposed to be given to them to help support them. And in return, they're supposed to educate and the community and serve God in the temple, etc. They go together. That's another interesting thing. The fact that we have the court in the temple courtyard, or in the temple compound, for lack of a better word at the moment, also is very fascinating. The fact that Judaism puts these two things together the God worship of the divine together with a court, which a court is kind of this nitty gritty thing where, you have to deal with human problems and it's in the same place. I mean, obviously the message is very, very clear that we should not, that human disputes and human problems are not something dirty that, is kind of a bothersome thing that, that the holiest people don't have time for, and they're busy in their worship and their, devotions, and they don't have time for any of that. No, right there in the same place, you have the sages and the priests and so on, busy ruling on different rulings for the people, from everything to, from capital punishment, adultery, to, menstrual cycles, to animals, a kosher, everything from A to Z. They're making decisions. It's all very, having to do with daily matters, human affairs. So that's an important idea. I wanted to mention an interesting point made by the Or HaChaim. It was a great, great commentary. Post Middle Ages commentary, who lived also in Safed, I believe. He comments, he says, why does this reading of Judges, etc., follow the previous story, which previously spoke about the festivals? We finished the parsha before with the commandments, the mitzvahs relating to the festivals, and the mitzvah, the commandment to appear in the temple, that all males need to appear and bring a sacrifice in the temple during the festivals. So he says that's why it says in all your cities here, because you would think, since all the people are coming up 3 times a year, so there's no need to have judges in every city, because they're all coming up to Jerusalem anyway, 3 times a year. So they could wait for 3 times a year. Says the verse here, no. Don't delay any rulings. You need to have courts in every city. You might think that you're coming up to Jerusalem, so that's enough. And when you come up, you'll see the judges there. No, there'll be judges in every. You need to appoint judges and courts and officers in all your cities, not just in Jerusalem. So I thought that was a very meaningful, interesting point he makes there. Okay, so now when we continue with the verse, it says that, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. So what is the meaning of that? Obviously, it's a command on the judges themselves that they have to adjudicate in an honest, upright, and unbiased manner, right? But it also means, as Rashi brings from our sages, you have to appoint judges that can bestow a righteous judgment. When we're commanding the nation, and you should judge righteously, or actually it says here, and they will judge the nation righteously, right? Let's see, how does he say it? And they shall judge the people righteously. So that's saying, make sure to appoint judges who can do that. They need to be learned. They need to know the law. They need to be, and as he said, partial. They need to be people who are going to be honest and partial. Not corrupt. So we have to make sure to appoint the right people. Obviously, that's incredibly important, because if they don't do so, then again we could have a situation in which the courts become illegitimate, and we have a situation in which judgment could be corrupted, and that is not good. Then so there's a question also of the idea of righteous judgment. So there are commentaries here that explain that the meaning of a righteous judgment means to say that the judge needs to come to an abstract ruling before he rules on this particular case. In other words, he has to get the facts, kind of write them down, forget about this case, and think about it in the abstract. If so and so and so happens, what is the ruling? And then decide, and then go back to the litigants. What does that mean? That's called deciding based on the rule of law, not based upon who is in front of you or any extraneous situations involving the people in front of you, but just the raw facts related to the ruling and the law that you're dealing with that pertains to you. In other words, how can I give an example of this? I mean, obviously in capital punishment, if somebody was warned and they did a physical act of violence that took the life of another, that's that. So what about instead? But if once he hears the case, there could be things involved in terms of, extraneous circumstances. There may have been pressure. There may have been an act of, what do they call that? A passionate, I forget what this is called in English. I remember learning about it in law school. But sometimes there's a passionate homicide where it's usually a husband, finds his wife in an adulterous situation and attacks the adulterer or possibly a spouse. The reason I bring this up, the point is that what the sage is evidently telling us is that not to look at extraneous circumstances, So, but at the same time, it's interesting that it says they're supposed to debate and try to find a merit or a demerit or so. Evidently, or to find some merit or to find so evidently that's within the law to find some kind of a weakness, to find some way to find this person not guilty, but not based on extraneous circumstances that are unrelated to the law. What I mean by that is as follows. What I mean by that is that the judges should try to find if there's some way out of it for the murderer. For example, is it possible he didn't hear the warning? Is it possible he didn't mean to kill this person? He only meant to wound this person. Is it possible it wasn't him? Different things like that. But once you know the facts, he doesn't have a right to look at the particular personalities and situations of the litigants, and that should play a role. That's got nothing to do with the case. That's called the rule of law. You can't look at extraneous circumstances. Although, in non-Jewish law, in terms of sentencing, they often do look at sometimes in terms of how heavy the sentence should be. They sometimes look at, is it a first-time offender or different things like that. So, but I don't think in Jewish law we have that type of idea. But in any case, the point is the way this commentary is telling us is that they must judge with a righteous judgment. What is a righteous judgment? They have to have the proper judgment and apply it. That's called rule of law. You can't just arbitrarily judge every case as it comes before you. In this case, what do I think is right? Tomorrow I might think something else is right. No, there's a law as it's given, and it's given the same for everybody, and that's the way you have to apply it and mete out justice evenly to all people. You can't give different rules for different people. So that's that. Now, what does the next verse say? You shall not pervert judgment. So that's very, very important as well. Shouldn't pervert corrupt judgment. Now, what's interesting is this is a very complex, with human beings, the idea of perverting justice can be very complicated. Very nuanced, and you have to be extremely careful. What I mean by that is, on paper, a case can look very straightforward and righteous, and it may not be. For example, a judge may accept a witness he knows he shouldn't, something to that effect. He could value evidence that he knows he shouldn't be doing. He could disqualify witnesses that he knows shouldn't be disqualified, just the opposite. I mean, there's a lot of sneaky little ways that a judge can manipulate a case. He can also refuse to wait for a litigant who says he has witnesses, but they're coming from a distance and he needs more time, and he could refuse to do so. There's a lot of different, as they say in Jewish shtick, there's a lot of different games that the judge can play around with to interfere with an outcome if he doesn't like a litigant. And that's not right. shouldn't do that. You should look to pursue to get to the truth and to have a judgment that's honest. And again, according to the rule of law. Okay. Then it says you shouldn't be biased. In the words here, it says you should not respect someone's presence. And that basically means you shouldn't be biased towards one person over another person. In the commentaries, it says, you shouldn't have one person stand and one person sitting, because once the litigant sees the way you're behaving towards his friend, basically in other words, he loses his confidence. If one litigant sees that the judge acts very respectfully and softly to his adversary and yells at him and gives him a hard time, that's no good. Even if you don't see any direct corruption in the actual procedures or rulings of the judgment, but just treating them differently is already a problem. That's a very, very wise, smart thing. And that's definitely a problem it's a problem. As a lawyer, I could tell you that might exist sometimes in our court system, where you could have different treatment of different people who comes in front of the judge. And that's not right. Judge has to be very careful, really, to keep a distance from all litigants and not show any favoritism or any relationship. They can get away with it, but I remember having these experiences with other lawyers where I'm representing another party. The other lawyer comes to this courthouse all the time, knows the judge. Oh, how are you, Judge? How's you doing? Oh, nice to see you. How you doing? Well, like Rashi says here, as soon as I see that, how do you think I feel? He's buddy-buddy with the judge. So you already feel less confident. That's not right. Even though he's not a litigant, but he's representing a litigant. In the court, you can't act friendly with, even if someone. And that's problematic, and it's a problem that we have in this system, because judges and lawyers mingle, and influential ones become friends with each other, and that's kind of problematic, I think. Ross, yeah.
Judges accepting bribes, perverting justice. A lot of times it can turn out that way, and then there is also the issue of maintaining his integrity so that he doesn't wind up being compromised in some fashion, in which at that point blackmail would become a hindrance for the judge's performance. And then again, it could be something as simple as just a personal bias, in which that someone might actually let the statute of limitations expire so that a prosecution doesn't actually occur. There's a lot of things that we need to be aware of, focused on, and again, if the judges have to be held as accountable as someone who actually commits a crime, because the bribery, accepting a bribery or a bribe, is a crime against justice itself.
Right. Right.
So these individuals should be held just as accountable as anyone else. And I think I found maybe sort of an example in Judges chapter 17, if you're familiar with that. Micah, a person that lives in one of the tribal areas, has had some silver, quite a substantial amount of silver, I think. His mother kept it for him, and then he eventually came back for the silver. This was in Ephraim, and she took a portion of the silver, made a graven image out of it. Micah took it, put it in his house. He made an ephod out of some of the silver. And then eventually he caught a Levite passing through and made an offer, come stay and be a father and a priest to me. I'll give you 10 pieces of silver, change of clothing. I'll give you food. Without hesitation, he says, okay. So again, it's the point of this particular chapter is saying everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. And I find that a little bit strange. Just are they insinuating that the king would be the only officer, if you will, or only person capable of such? Or was there just maybe some misunderstanding on the implementation of judges here?
I mean, just off the top of my head, it sounds like what the verse is saying is that there was a void of a centralized power here, so that there was nobody that was instituting justice throughout, and that was a problem. So the villages here and there in these tribes, things were people behaving like this. Here they were doing this, and all. There was no centralized control. There was no real centralized government, to say the least. It sounds like it may have been even worse, but by saying everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, there really there wasn't this idea of judges and officers as needed to be. I mean, just in judges itself, I mean, the idea of judges was just one judge for all of Israel, and often even not for all of Israel, where the discussions are about a judge that's involved with several tribes at a time. If you look carefully, I mean, it's rarely all of Israel, even in the cases of the stories you find in Judges. So it was a very problematic time where there was no one uniting all the tribes together, all of Israel. And people seemed to have just been, it was kind of reactive, where people were just, busy with their own fields and flocks. And I guess town elders maybe got together sometime, but there was really nobody. This idea of seeking out, making, well, again, as we said, what this whole law is about, I think, seems to have been a bit lacking. And certainly, I think what I was saying there about Micah is that he was doing this, and he had a certain amount of wealth, as you said, and there's no one to stop him. There was no one to say, "Hey, what is going on here? You can't do this." There was no one more powerful than him to say, "Stop." And so that was a tremendous problem, and obviously that fits into there was no king in Israel, so he was just. He was the big fish in the small pond and just doing what he wanted. That's very problematic. I'm glad you brought it up about the bribes. That is the next thing in the verse. You shouldn't take a bribe, and then it says something very psychological that a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise, right? And the next word is a little bit in the Hebrew, "Yisalev divrei tzadikim." It's translated to "and makes the words of the righteous, of the just, crooked." I think Rashi comments or something on that. Not really interesting. Anyway, it makes the judgment of the righteous. It makes crooked righteous judgments or righteous rulings. So, in other words, once you may think, sometimes a judge thinks, "I'll take the money. I'm still going to be fair. It's not going to affect me." And the verse is saying, "No, you won't. You think you are, you're not going to." And it's just like it's going to happen. Don't think you're smarter and you're less human than everyone else. There was some nice stories about Rabbi. I think in the Talmud there's a story about. I'm trying to think if it was. Something very subtle. I don't recall exactly if it was someone holds a door for a certain rabbi, or he gives him a certain amount of respect, and later he doesn't want to be one of his judges. I forget the exact story at the top of my head at the moment, but it was something more subtle. And he said, that enough that you did for me, that already is a problem. That's already, you acted in a manner that, I may be slightly biased in your favor because of the extra amount of respect or, slightly or some assistance he may have given him. I think it was a case in which, if I'm not mistaken, that this gentleman, this layman, like put down a cloak or something in order to assist the rabbi from passing over a muddy area. And he said, that's enough. That's already a bribe, meaning that's already a reason for me to cause some slight, minute bias. I'm not going to judge your case anymore. So we see how far this goes, to what extent. And we have to be really, really careful with that, not to bias. And we find the same things with, honestly, in secular courts, I think this is a real problem, is that too often the decisions of juries can be based on the personality of the lawyer. If the lawyer is more charming and gets on better with the jury and knows how to talk in a way where with a very cool, how do I say, his tongue just, he says the right joke, they maybe identify with him demographically more than the other lawyer, whatever it may be. They like his personality, and they may just go with him. And that's a problem. That's a problem. And honestly, I think it's a problem with the jury system at large, is that they haven't been educated to just follow, an objective rule of law. They're just lay people asked to make a decision. Sometimes they can get it right. Sometimes they can get it wrong. And like I said, the problem is too many biases can come into play. So what do you do about the problem with judges sometimes being too aloof or being taught of an elite class? I mean, that's also a problem. I don't know, but the verse here disagrees with the idea of having laymen decide anything. We have to have people that are, what did we say? That they judge righteously with righteous judgment. That means that they know the law. You can't have people who don't know the law make decisions, even though you have the issues with an elite, judge class and what to do about that. That's a separate issue which needs to be dealt with separately. Maybe by having certain deterrents, maybe by having a mix of type of people who are judges from different, socioeconomic classes. But putting people in there who don't know what they're doing and have no sense of, of what a lawyer or what a judge needs to do, which means taking a step back, as I said before, looking at just the relevant facts and coming to a decision, and they're not accustomed to really doing that. I don't know. I think it's a problem, and I'm an attorney, so maybe that's why I think so. But I guess my point is, as a rabbi, is that the jury system doesn't seem to fit into what the Torah is commanding here, in my opinion. Saying you need to have expert judges decide things, not lay people. That's really the point I'm trying to make. Ross, the yellow hand is up. What does it say?
Well, it says, just to add a little spice to what you're saying, something as simple as somebody that you've been friends with for 15, 20 years. Hey, let's go out and have dinner together, right? And something as simple as that judge just going to have dinner with someone could be considered a bribe or a gift or an influence of some sort, whether or not that individual has to go before that particular court. It still might be perceived as, well, you're trying to influence his decision on some case that he may be concerned about. He's no part of it. He's just concerned about it. And to bolster the argument, that's exactly what Samuel said as he went about his business throughout all the various places. Have I ever taken anything from anybody? Right. A donkey, a mule, anything. And he said, search around, find anybody that can stand up and say, well, remember I gave you? Nobody can say that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Um, you have to think about a kind of society that can create that, that can create a situation in which we have a judge and a leader that doesn't take a salary and may be a little broke, but still doing his job. How can we have a society like that? What creates that kind of a leader? We don't really have leaders like that. We have presidential candidates, most of them are millionaires, if not billionaires. I don't know. And the ones who aren't, anyway, I should leave politics out of it. But my point is simply is that nowadays, people don't do anything that's hard and difficult and has a lot of responsibility except for a lot of money. And evidently, that wasn't the case with Samuel. And we have to, try to understand like what kind of a society was that. Obviously, a very different one, a lot less mercantile, a lot less possessions oriented society that was able to do that. So that's another thing. I mean, it's very indirect. It's very implicit. It's not, but you know, but it's indirectly obviously a part of something as the Noahide community has to think about, as well as the Jewish community has to think about, is how do we create a society that will follow laws? Obviously that's something the judges have to. How do we teach, but in a way, again, well, how do we avoid a society where bribes is not an issue? Like, how do we create a world where this is less? Basically, what I'm saying is, how do we create a society where there's less greed? How do we do that? How do we educate people in a way where they're less money on possessions focused? Well, we could, all right. I'm not going to start going off on things, but we certainly should start it off by not telling people that happiness comes from having things. That might be a good start. So, anyway, I did say I wanted to discuss some things in our book, and I didn't quite finish even these three verses. I don't think I finished in an hour, so that's pretty good. We did pretty well today. We had a nice discussion because I haven't even finished these three verses. I couldn't get through them. The last verse was here is a famous verse: "Justice, justice, or righteousness, righteousness, shall you pursue." Very, very famous verse. And obviously, there are very few times in scripture that a word is repeated for emphasis like this. It shows you how important this idea is of having justice. And again, the idea of justice is vindicating people who are helpless and need to be vindicated. It's such an important idea, really. Again, it has to do, is religion something private where I get close to God and I don't care about what's going on in the rest of the world? Or is it both? And that's, I think, the beauty here is that Judaism's message is neither one is good enough on its own. We can't just say I'm a social justice warrior that, gets drunk as on drugs or whatever. No, you have to also be with God and also be for people. They have to go together. And that's why there's the two tablets, right? Of course, one is for primarily between man and God, and then there's one for man and man. Both elements of Torah observance are important. You can't say I'm just this one, I'm just the other one. And I think that's also the message of having the Sanhedrin, on the temple grounds, is that, part of worshiping me is taking care of human disputes, right? But this last verse is very, very, it's very powerful. Let's read it inside here. Righteousness, righteousness shall you pursue, so that you will live and possess the land that God or the Lord your God gives you. Right? So, first of all, the emphasis, and to say pursue it, go after it. You're pursuing something that's elusive. When do you pursue something? Pursue something that's hard to find. You don't have to pursue something that's in your pocket. Is it because it's not easy? It's not easy. There are problems. There are people that don't want it. The Torah is very practical. It knows there are people with powerful people or whatever it may be, people who are biased, that don't want an honest judgment, and telling you to pursue one. It's also maybe saying you may be hard for you to pursue a righteous judgment because you want to win. The verse is telling you don't pursue winning, pursue a righteous judgment. That's what you should be pursuing.